Welcome to Chapter 10, CHSF 2107. That's not very good. I should have corrected that pre-recording, but anyways, the lighting in here is kind of not the greatest, so, sorry, I have the baby sleeping upstairs, and, she's pretty fast asleep right now. I don't know if you can see the monitor. And I don't think that's picking up too much or at all in the mic, so I think we're okay. Anyways, that was a little, unnecessary ramble to start the video. I love yous. Hope you're doing okay. I appreciate your kindness, and I don't know, NIPSing students are awesome. Let's get into it. Physical and Cognitive Development, Chapter 10. Recall that Erikson, so we've talked about Erikson. I have in my note, recall that Erikson, recall is like, I don't know, it just felt, that's not a way I would naturally talk. But if you think back to how Erikson was talking in the last chapter about identity confusion, right? Identity versus identity confusion, that pursuing who we are, what we are all about, where we're going in life, that this is the most important social, psychosocial issue to be negotiated in adolescence. In early adulthood, Erikson teaches that as individuals are on their way to establishing stable, successful identities, they then enter this next stage where it's like about deciding who you want to have in your life, right? And developing this intimacy. I went off my note. They enter the sixth developmental stage, which is intimacy versus isolation, right? And just think of it from a step back perspective. It's like, okay, so now you've kind of figured out who you are, and now it's about finding out the types of relationships you want to have in your life. And of course, like, your mind immediately probably jumps to like romantic relationships, because that's a huge aspect of our experience, and that's certainly an aspect of what Erikson's talking about, but he's certainly not just talking about that. He's talking about friendship, he's talking about family, he's talking about like meaningful interactions in your life, and that this period's really important in kind of establishing your social world. And he's saying like the risk of not doing that is this potential risk of isolation, and something that maybe all too many of us experienced some of over the last few years. But I want to kind of highlight this point, right? He defines intimacy as the capacity to engage in supportive, so like, mutually cooperative, affectionate, emotionally based relationships, but without losing your sense of who you are, right? Without melting into the other person's identity, staying true to yourself. It's like that's almost definitionally, in his words, the definition of a more adult relationship, or a more healthy adult relationship, because obviously there's millions of examples of adult relationships that aren't healthy. He's saying that's actually difficult. And he's also making the point that like intimacy doesn't just mean having someone, and it certainly doesn't just mean having a sexual partner, right? He said you could be in a relationship with someone and experience that relationship as psychologically isolating, right? The physical act doesn't necessarily come side by side with supportive relationships, as everybody obviously knows. But it's an interesting point, right? That like that distinction from an Eriksonian, if that's a word, perspective is actually significant. It's like deep down you thrive, or you strive for like, or you need relationships that are actually meaningful with people that actually care about you and that you care about. It's like it's completely different than relationships that are more transactional. Like all of Erikson's developmental crises that people go through, or challenges or dilemmas, right? He used a few different words, basically crises and dilemmas. These challenges, right? Like just like a baby has to establish trust, and a kid has to establish autonomy and intimacy and identity. Autonomy and industry and initiative, right? And a teenager has to establish identity, and a young adult has to try to establish intimacy. And again, it's like the risk, because this is the thing, is like, This is the hardest lesson of Erickson. It's the roughest one. It's like the same thing with trust. It's like it's not like you either just have trust or you don't. And you've heard me say this before. I'm sorry, but it's worth repeating. I think that like the opposite of trust isn't just not trust. It's actually an active mistrust. It's a deeply placed cynicism, right? So it's like, it's not like it's not having it just means you don't have that. It actually means you have in volumes the opposite. That isolation can be the result of relationships that are inadequate. See, like I kind of cut myself off while talking. I keep bumping the table. This is like, as a presenter on a video, I'm at a terrible chair table height ratio. My knees are way too close to the table. I'll adjust it between slides. But okay, isolation results from relationships that are inadequate. But I wanted to highlight that point, that those are relationships. It's like, it doesn't just mean you're by yourself. That you can be surrounded by people and feel isolated, and that isolation is more of a psychological thing at times. Now, obviously, actual physical isolation is devastating too. So he says isolation in relationships results from when the relationship is seen as inadequate, when there's a lack of self-disclosure, right? Like, you're not telling me anything, I'm not telling you anything. There's like a breakdown of trust elementally. And we're both bringing our unresolved identity crises from our previous developmental stage to the relationship. Boom, that is such a heavy hit if you're actually like kind of following along. That's a devastating point. It's like, it's basically saying like sometimes our minds almost, and our emotional systems almost too locked up and still processing things that already happened, and both of us might be like that, and it's actually interfering with us being present with each other. So Dr. Jeffrey Arnett had this idea that we almost could label a specific developmental period. I'm redoing this slide, so I forgot what I did, if I said that I switched chairs. Yeah, switch chairs, so I won't be bouncing the camera as much, or hopefully at all. So Arnett thought that like, and this probably makes sense to you, right? Obviously, like early teen years and late teen years, they are significantly different. And when you're at this like 17 to 22 age, he said this is like a very challenging time for kids, or not kids, for emerging adults, because they're not kids anymore, right? They're not teens anymore. Well, they're still teens, I guess, if they're at 17, 18, 19. But what I mean is they're not kids anymore. And they're being put in a lot of adult situations, right? Whether we're talking about like relationship-wise, or we're talking about in terms of maybe living on your own for the first time, or moving out of, or yeah, like paying for yourself for the first time, or like trying to decide what you're going to do with your life, like in terms of academics and how you're going to live, and like, are you going to, have their like friendships, how you're going to behave, like all different interpretations of what how you behave means. Right, how you're gonna like live your life, and how you're gonna work, and how you're gonna handle the whole romantic side of your life. And you're in this scenario where you're being presented, or I have their like experiment with a lot of adult options, and at the same time, the parts of the brain that are responsible for governing impulse control, like we're going to watch a video on the next slide about the prefrontal cortex, just a quick 2-minute neuroscience one, that because this isn't fully controlled yet, right? It's like, and you've heard this before, that the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain, right, the part that's in front of the motor cortex, is the part of your brain that is really involved in weighing consequence. Like, I shouldn't do this because, like, I shouldn't say this to my wife when we're in this argument because I'm, like, really going to wreck the next few days, and, like, I should just bite my tongue. Nope, I'm mad, say it. It's like, well, the part of your brain that's, like, trying to tell you to put the brakes on, the somber second thought, or whatever, it's like, they used to say that about the House of Commons, it's supposed to be sober second thought. Like, you had the idea, then you sit back and you think about it again. It's like that part of your brain's still developing. That was a weird rant, but yeah, so this is this idea of emerging adulthood we're going to be on for a little bit here. Okay, so the next video is going to be about the prefrontal cortex.
The term prefrontal cortex, or PFC, can be used to refer generally to the part of the frontal lobe that is anterior to or in front of the motor cortex. Neuroscientists generally further divide the PFC into subregions, and while there is no clear consensus on what those subregions should be, some common demarcations include the dorsolateral, dorsomedial, ventrolateral, ventromedial, and orbitofrontal regions. The PFC makes up a substantial proportion of the entire brain, and thus is not surprisingly involved in a long list of functions, but it is most commonly associated with executive functions. There isn't a precise definition for the term executive functions, but it generally refers to processes that focus on controlling short-sighted behavior to be able to act with a goal in mind. This may include things like self-control, planning, decision-making, and problem-solving. Because these are complex cognitive functions, it is unlikely any one brain region is solely responsible for them, and more likely they depend on distributed networks of brain regions. Nevertheless, the PFC seems to play a critically important role in executive functions, a hypothesis supported by neuroimaging research and cases where the PFC was damaged and executive functions impaired. Although each of the subregions of the PFC is typically associated with slightly different aspects of cognition, we are not yet at the point where we can confidently assign specific roles to PFC subregions. Most evidence suggests that the executive functions of the PFC are accomplished due to the interaction of these subregions and their communication with other areas outside the PFC. One general model of PFC function is that it receives sensory information about the external world, uses that information to plan responses, and then communicates with other areas of the brain to enact a response, which might involve anything ranging from movement to simply a redirection of attention.
Okay. Psychology, if you haven't noticed yet, kind of likes models. It's like, well, that's a good idea, but can you show me it in a shape-based picture? It's like everything seems to be like this. But it's, if you actually start to not appreciate, yeah, and know how to look at these and realize that they're actually trying to capture a complex, complete theoretical idea. Maybe stern a bit, but I think it's okay. Within like a image, right? Like it's like, okay, so one of the things that's interesting about the positive aspects of emerging adulthood, because yeah, there's negative aspects. We can talk about peer pressure. We can talk about like the pressures that, not just peer pressure, just like societal pressure on that age group, right? Peer pressure is an aspect of it. But some of the positive things is it's really the time in your life where there's no other time where your life could go in as many different directions, right? In terms of, yeah, like who you fall in love with, what you do with your life, the type where you live, the type of day-to-day behavior you engage in, the type of belief system you develop, all these things, right? And they're influenced by a bunch of things. Like some of it is influenced by opportunities, like if you and Mr. or Mrs. Right or whatever, that was a dumb way of saying it, but pass each other at the right time. There's a certain like fate or timing or fortune aspect of that, right? And so there's this idea of like, okay, it's because of this unique connection between opportunities that you have, whether it's work or school or romantically, or to maybe have transformational contexts, like going away to university and being in a scenario that's like very unique. It's like the average person didn't go to university a few hundred years ago. It's like that was a very like restricted thing. It's like pretty awesome that there's obviously a million issues with post-secondary education, but like it's a transformational context, especially in the sense that you're like potentially moving away, potentially around new people, potentially going to meet a potential partner or friend group, or the idea that it could change your life is very much true. And like how much adult support you have or how much mentors you have affects the process, and how motivated you can stay, and what are your aspirations and goals, and how much self-efficacy, that Bandura word for like confidence in your ability to do things, do you have, how much hope do you have, and how much do you exert your own agency, and how much do you kind of put strategic executive control or like high-level planning towards things like planning for your future orientation, or like self-regulation at a level of like discipline and structure, self-direction, and planfulness, right? That's a kind of neat word that you don't see much but makes sense, right? Like how much you kind of It's like, yeah, you either have a plan or what's the old saying? Like, anyways, that like, I was trying to think, it's like a man without a plan is not a, whatever. It's like this idea that you're not going to be the person you can be if you can't make a goal and aim at it. It's like, you've heard me rant about this before. Humans are visual creatures. It's like, even our words for like, stay focused in your life, have a good direction, stay on point, be targeted in on things. Like, what's your vision for things? Like, I don't know, I kind of double used a couple words, but you start to see like a lot of our words for goal setting, even goal setting, right? A goal is something that you're aiming a ball or a puck or something at. That's an aim-based thing. So your brain is in a more of a flow state. I have a video coming up on flow state that I think is kind of interesting, because I know you've probably heard of it, but I think this fight mediocrity or something like that, is Mediocrity is the name of the YouTube channel. He's pretty good. Pretty interesting not side take, but like application take of it. I usually call it like side take when it's not just someone trying to explain it, but it's someone trying to be like, this idea, I think it means this. It's kind of like his take on it. Side take. Just to be hardcore repetitive. Okay, next slide. Yeah, and sorry if I'm being like kind of a little bit silly or weird today. It's just, to be honest, I was kind of sick this week, and I'm getting out of being sick, and it's just, I don't know, I have like there's nothing better than not being sick anymore. Okay, so some of the key features of emerging adulthood, right? So what are some of the key features of this? If you're taking notes, this like 17 to 22 developmental period that I'm like presenting Arnett's argument for, is this like specific developmental period. What's unique about it, right? Well, number one, he says there's this increased focus on identity expression, right? Which is like exactly what Erickson says, especially in the areas of like love and work, and you could put /school, because that's obviously connected to work in some ways, not, you know what I mean? It's like obviously related to your long-term vocational goals, but there's aspects of especially a traditional liberal education that are beyond just vocational training, like the development of character. That's why it's called the humanities. The instability, right? That there's this like basically this period of change, right? The transformational context. You might be changing where you live, residential changes. You might be have breakups or new relationships, and that could be true in your love relationships, in your work relationships, in your school scenarios, right? It's more self-focused, and that doesn't mean like, usually when you say someone's self-focused, it almost means like they're selfish. It doesn't necessarily mean that. It just means, and I don't know, maybe give myself as an example. It's like, it'd be better if I was just doing this in the basement by myself, right? But it's like, I don't really have the option to not keep the monitor on. It's like, that's kind of an obligation, and it's like, it's one of my 3 biggest blessings, right? In case my wife is watching. I switched, almost said 2, but I said 3, getting married and the 2 kids. It's like, but still to say that it's like not work-based would be crazy. So when you're in this emerging adulthood, you don't quite have that level of responsibility yet. It's coming, but it's more self-focused still. It's more in between. Many emerging adults don't consider themselves really teens or full adults yet. They kind of feel it, right? Whether they're like actually using that kind of language or not. We're talking more about, feeling. And that it's this opportunity to transform your life, right? And I kind of used the term on the last page, the transformational context. So I believe the next slide is going to be Arnett speaking.
I think we'd all agree that it takes longer to grow up today than it did in the past. That seems like a fairly uncontroversial statement, and it's backed up by a lot of facts. So in 1960, if we take 1960 as a baseline year, relatively few people got any education beyond high school, if they even finished high school. and 40% of people didn't even get that far. In 1960, the median marriage age was 20 for women and 23 for men. Now it's 27 for women and 29 for men, and still rising. So a lot has changed in the course of the last 50 years in the lives of young people. So much has changed, in fact, that I proposed that it's helpful to think of it as a new life stage of emerging adulthood in between adolescence and young adulthood. But why does it take so long to grow up now, so much longer than in the past? Why is there this new stage of emerging adulthood? There are four revolutions that took place in the 1960s and 1970s that set the stage in many ways for the society that we know today, including the new life stage of emerging adulthood. Those four revolutions are the technology revolution, the sexual revolution, the women's movement, and the youth movement. First, the technology revolution. The technology revolution is not just iPhones and iPads or even laptops and the internet. Another huge technology revolution of the last 50 years has been the transition from a manufacturing economy to a knowledge economy. We've gotten so good at making things with machines that we no longer need so many people to make them. Most of us are aware of how a lot of jobs in manufacturing have gone to other countries, but it's not just that. Our manufacturing output is actually 6 times greater now than it was in the 1950s, but we're able to do that with only half as many people. So gone are the days where a young man could walk into an automobile factory or a steel plant and make enough money to support not only himself and his family. The new jobs in the knowledge economy are in information and technology and services. And all of those require education beyond high school. Those are where you get the best new jobs in the knowledge economy. You have to have some kind of education beyond high school. And so now more people get more education for longer than ever before. And that pushes everything else out, because most people won't get a stable long-term job for several years after they have finished their education. And most people prefer to wait for marriage and parenthood until after they have a stable job. The second revolution is the sexual revolution. The invention of the birth control pill in 1964, along with other effective methods of contraception, broke the age-old link between sexuality and reproduction for the first time. And in turn, the link between sexuality and marriage became broken for the first time. And so the marriage age started to go steadily up, even as the age of beginning first sexual relations went down. And today, most people begin having sexual relations in their late teens, a decade or more before they enter marriage and parenthood. And so that changes what the late teens and 20s are like. Instead of entering the commitments of marriage and parenthood, people now have this long expanse of a decade or more when they are making and breaking relationships and they're not yet committed to the structure of family life. Number 3 is the women's movement. In 1960, not many people were going to college, but there were twice as many men as women who were college students. Today, 58% of undergraduates are female, only 42% male. And women are also half of the students in med schools, in law schools, in business schools. That has been truly revolutionary. And that has changed how young women think about their lives and plan their lives. It's hard for us even to imagine how much pressure there must have been on a young woman in 1960 to find a man. Because if you didn't, what else were you going to do with your life? There weren't really hardly any professions open to you. And so that was what they were most focused on. Now that they can do anything, they, like young men, want to use most of their 20s for making progress in their education and then in their career. And that has changed entirely what the 20s are like for both young men and young women. And finally, the youth movement. It used to be that adulthood was associated with a lot of good things. It was a source of status, and authority. Well, it still is to some extent, but not as much as it used to be. The 60s and 70s changed that with the youth movement. I hope I die before I get old. How many of you are old enough to remember that? Or never trust anyone over 30. Now, those were said somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but only somewhat. There was a truth underlying them, that now adulthood and age became diminished, and it became youth that was venerated. And so young people were no longer in such a hurry to enter adulthood. They preferred to prolong their youth as long as they could and enjoy it while it lasted. So together, those four changes have resulted in this new life stage of emerging adulthood. It used to be that people set up the stable structure of an adult life by about age 20. But now it's really true that 30 is the new 20. There's a good reason why that phrase has become popular, because now the transitions that used to happen around age 20 happen closer to age 30 for most people. Instead of moving from adolescence to young adulthood at around age 20, it's adolescence, and then emerging adulthood for most of the 20s, and then the entrance to a stable young adulthood follows. Now, not everybody is delighted to hear about the new life stage of emerging adulthood. Not everybody is happy that it takes longer to grow up than it used to. Quite the contrary. A lot of people are very unhappy about it. And a lot of people think that the fact that young people enter these transitions of a stable adulthood later in the past means there must be something wrong with them. And their parents and grandparents can't help but look at the progress or lack of it of their children and grandchildren toward adult life in their 20s and think, and maybe say, when I was your age, because the timetable has really changed. But I'd like to challenge you, if you think that way today, to try to think about it differently. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with them. It takes longer to prepare yourself for the knowledge economy than it did for a manufacturing economy, first of all. So that's not their fault. They are very intently involved in preparing themselves for that world and in trying to find a place in a very complex economy. Secondly, the women's movement has opened up a huge range of opportunities for young women, but that's not a bad thing. I think few of us would view that as a negative development. It's a good thing. It's a great thing. And so having this life stage of emerging adulthood allows both young men and young women to develop their skills for the workplace. There's also that, wouldn't most of us make a better choice of a marriage partner at 28 or 29 or 30 than we would at 19 or 20 or 21? Wouldn't most of us be a better parent if we began that at 30 or 31 rather than 20 or 21? I don't think there's any doubt about that. There's also this. Having the space for emerging adulthood gives young people an unprecedented and unparalleled period of freedom. It's a time when you can do things that you never could do before when you were a kid, and you really won't be able to do later. So if you have a taste for adventure, if you'd like to see what it's like to live in a different part of the country or the world for a while, and maybe do some kind of service project there, this is the time to do it. If you'd like to take a stab at a long shot career like actor or musician or something else in the arts, this is the time to do it. Because later it will be much more difficult when you've made those commitments. Right now, in emerging adulthood, nobody else really depends on you. That's one of the unique things about it. And eventually, people will depend on you, and that will narrow the range of your choices. During emerging adulthood, you have a rare freedom and a brief freedom, and you should make the most of it. I'd like to close by saying to the young people, those who are emerging adults or about to be, Don't let anybody stampede you to adulthood before you're ready. Adulthood will still be ready when you are. And a lot of well-meaning people want you to get there as soon as possible. But it's not their life, it's your life. And you should remind them of that if necessary. Adulthood is something that almost everybody enters eventually. And it's a land that once you enter, you can never really go back. So make the most of your emerging adulthood freedom while it lasts. Thank you. Thank you.
So I have here markers of adulthood, right? Like things that textbooks talking about this a bit, but just like things that in our society, you know, whether we like it or not, kind of identifies as being associated with being adult. And one of the things is like there's expectation on you, and you probably feel it probably from your parents and the people around you, to be working towards some kind of career, right? That there's more pressure maybe on you than ever before, and if not yet, it's coming to be more independent economically and in your finances, right? And weirdly, we don't teach people much about finance. I don't know if people are interested. It'd be an interesting side project for the channel, but like people teaching students more about financial literacy is so important, especially in today's market. Like being able to, the biggest thing is like being able to have a down payment for a house, because the thing that people don't realize is like rent payments aren't that much less than mortgage payments. What the hurdle for people is of getting houses is the initial down payment, right? But if you're a first-time home buyer, again, I maybe I shouldn't be giving financial advice, but just like taking a course on personal finance or something like that would be so smart for you. And having some kind of tax-free savings account building towards your first down payment, if that's what you're looking towards. You can find smarter financial people than me. Forgetting what the one podcast I liked, was it Dave Ramsey? He was really good at breaking down like how credit and stuff works. But anyways, that's not what you're here for. But there's an aspect of, well, I guess it's relevant to what I'm talking about, right? Academic independence, and it's like that's difficult. It's actually kind of difficult to balance your budget and to understand how things work and how to automate, make everything automatic. And so that's like a new challenge with this stage and accepting responsibility over that kind of stuff. I wanted to talk about this too, like why is there like, for example, if you say like, okay, how come teenagers, or we say like, okay, developmentally we see there's more risk-taking activity happening for people in like the mid to late teen range than at other developmental periods. That would be like a saying you could say from developmental psychology, because in developmental psychology, you're observing behavior over huge amounts of people and you're trying to look for commonalities, right? It's the what, right? So I'm basically going to make the point is then if you're like, well, why is that the case? That is when you start to breach into the topic of evolutionary psychology, right? What pressures existed on humans over huge time periods? That's what would have shaped our developmental influences to a certain extent, obviously, like current culture is another factor. But if you almost look at this word development and evolution as two parts of the same word, right? Evolution is across multiple lifespans. Development is within one of those lifespans. So every lifespan within a chain of evolution develops, right? Or at least in theory, to the age of reproduction and then passes on the genes. So developmental psychology is the what, evolutionary psychology is the why. It's an oversimplification, but I think it's functional. A significant proportion of theories within the discipline of developmental psychology are going to be focused on early childhood, obviously, because this is the time when the most change is happening. So then the paired slide to that last one is this idea of evolutionary psychology. Like, what kind of pressures were on people? Like how our memory evolved in a response to our environment. It's like memory is like one of the most functional things. Why are so many of our dreams anxiety-based? Well, because maybe dreaming is running a lot of simulations to simulate real-world situations so that when you get into situations, you have behavioral wiring available, right? It's almost like your brain's running simulations of potential situations, and you don't have to run a million simulations of happy things if we're in a survival scenario, right? So that's what natural selection, right? Remember, always nature, natural selection, always remember natural and nature are basically the same word. It's like nature selects certain things. It selects things that are more survival promoting. This is a kind of depressing slide, but just this idea of like depressing for me that, physical development, it's like we know that most physical performance peaks a little bit before 30, right? Like if you look at pro athletes, oftentimes physical peaks are talked about as being sort of somewhere between 19 and 26. By the time people reach about 30, you start to see some decline, especially in relation to muscle tone and overall strength. But not just that, like I thought this was interesting to show you, like to highlight, even the lens of the eye loses some of its elasticity, right? So that's like related to like the need for more glasses and stuff. So that's like, it's not just like the muscles or the sore back, it's like even like the eyes like getting less elastic, and like everything's like, it's like your system's degrading a little bit, wear and tear. Hearing begins to decline in the last part of early adulthood. So as you begin to get close to middle age, middle and late 20s, the amount of fatty tissue increases. It's like that's the Adam Sandler line in the movie, the one where he adopts the kid, Big Daddy or something, one of the Adam Sandler movies, and he's like, yeah, I used to eat whatever I want, now I eat a cheeseburger, and I'm jiggly for a week. It's like, that's kind of the idea of that's like a hard thing for people to kind of deal with. It's one of the things you got to deal with as you're getting older, is that like your metabolism changes too, right? Especially for like athletes, especially if you were like an athlete that played sports all the time, and then this happens to I'm thinking of some slightly myself and even friends, like where it's like you played sports, so you kind of got away with anything diet-wise to a certain degree, and then you stop playing as much sports, and then you maintain that calorie intake, and then you got a potential issue on your hands. So all these things, it's like understanding that the biological aspect of that, right? It's like that's related to this increased storage of fatty tissue. That's completely normal. Okay. So this is, some of these next topics are going to be, I should maybe give a disclaimer that I'm going to mention suicide, I'm going to mention mental health, I'm going to mention substance use, I'm going to mention, I might mention eating disorders briefly. I don't think so, actually, sorry. But, the difficult part about us, and I lost one of my good friends in high school with a suicide. It was brutal. It's like I can certainly understand that this is not a topic to touch on without deep consideration and attention to what you're saying. The leading cause of death between 15 and 34-year-olds. Right, and you can take accidents as almost all being car-related. Not all, but statistically, almost all. Things like inactivity and diet and obesity or substance use or issues around reproductive health, especially in countries where that's not as good, and access to health care worsened in emerging adulthood, right? And sometimes that's because maybe especially depends on what country we're talking about here, right? Especially in places where you maybe have to pay for your medicine. Rates of being overweight, obesity increased from, think about this, 25.6% for first year students to about 32% for students in fourth year. And like, you ask what that is. It's like, is it just that change in metabolism? Is it stress? Is it pressure? Is it reduction in activity? Issues with weight are linked to things like hypertension, right? So like stress on the heart, diabetes, cardiovascular, again, heart, lungs, disease associated with mental health issues. Again, when I talk about this kind of stuff, I hope you notice the change in tone. I'm not like, Mikey jokes anymore. It's like I'm trying to and I'm not trying to be like inauthentically like dramatic. I'm just saying like these are things that hit close to people, and so I'm trying to walk this ground with respect and with some depth. In adolescence, young men are more likely to take drugs, right? More likely to deal with addiction in general. We know that. It's like one of the most first things you learn about adolescent mental health and early adult mental health is like women are more likely to be dealing with anxiety-based scenarios, and men are more likely to be dealing with substance-based scenarios. And in a certain level, those are not completely isolated different things. They are, obviously, they're not the same thing, but I mean, there's a lot of self-medicating men in that group. Binge drinking peaks, and man, I get it. The world can be very painful, and things can be very painful, and situations can be painful, and things can seem bleak and without hope. But like, there's a better tomorrow, man. There's a better tomorrow. You gotta tell yourself that. Again, I don't mean to be like super deep on this or whatever, but like, yeah, binge drinking peaks at about 21, 22. That's probably not super surprising. Declines later in your 20s, and that's just like there's a little bit of like, yeah, no kidding. Binge drinking, though, is on the rise. About 25% of Canadian women between the ages of 20 and 34 report at least sometimes it being the case, right? And binge drinking, like, we don't have to get super technical, basically just means like not just like having a few, but like drinking to get drunk, I guess. And binge kind of implies like, like a long party kind of wasted weekend or whatever. The brain undergoes a lot of changes, right? Not like completed. And this is this idea why like sometimes there is a risk of addiction, especially to things like even like you wouldn't necessarily think like nicotine. Right, if you ever want me to go down a wild, super long rant, I won't right now, I promise. But it's like you should look into the Camel, like the cigarette Camel. I forget what his name was. But it's like Camel. I guess it was just Camel cigarettes. I think they were forced in court to basically admit that they were aiming that like cartoon graphic Camel at kids. Which, man, from a marketing psychology perspective, is again, if you were trying to give them the biggest benefit of the doubt, you'd be like, well, they didn't know it was harmful. It's like, I think the tobacco companies knew pretty early. It's like, that's pretty messed. But then again, it's like so much of the advertising world is pretty messed if you think about it, and is aimed at young kids. But that's maybe a topic for a different day. Again, this is like, I want to make the point, obviously I'm like a 41-year-old dad with 2 kids. It's like, what do I know about dating these days? But like, some of the research, part of it is this obviously isn't like Mike's opinion 101, right? Like I'm doing presentations based on a kind of combination of my learned experience, or I guess just like my experience, like things I've read and come across, and learned experience. I guess every kind of experience is a learned experience, but and then just like the textbook and stuff too, right? It's like some of this is what we have reported. It's like family structures and peer influences are still are big impacts on sexual activity. It's like the less monitoring of the kid, the more promiscuous, or more the permissive the rules, it seems to be associated with promiscuous activity. And the thing is that, and again, it's like there's an element of this, it's easier because it's online and I'm able to just express the full thought, but like this would be better if we could talk about it. It's like both sexes feel pressured to engage in sexual activity. It's like when you ask people though, it's like males that engage in earlier sexual activity or whatever tends to be linked to more externalized masculinity, or tends to be linked to like positive emotional responses, whereas and not even that, like this is the thing people need to realize too, is like there's some guys that are that, like, the stats on this are actually pretty interesting. There's some guys that are those like club guys that are like maybe having tons and tons of relationships. There's all kinds of guys that are having 0 relationships, right? And this is, again, I've just like swam out into deep water here because this is like such a complicated multi-factor thing, right? Why is female promiscuity often linked with kind of social emotional issues or like identity related issues? It's like, well, again, that's like as deep of a question as you can ask. That's like a core psychological question. It's like, how do early experiences, and especially relationships in the family, affect behavior as an adult? It's like, that's a psychodynamic question. Right? Like, this is the thing. It's like, it's so weird because I feel like in 2023, I need to like disclaimer any comment I make towards, you know, it might be better for you long term to like pick someone you actually love and like stay loyal and committed and stick with them. It's like the culture's like, no, we're Brave New World. It's like promiscuity reigns. It's like, okay, but without any morals, because I'm not in your family and I'm not your priest or anything like that. And I mean, I'm not trying to sound smart ass. I'm just saying, it's like, I'm not trying to judge. I'm just saying the psychological evidence is clear. It's clear as day. That, especially, here's the thing, it's like, if 2 people are casually engaged and both are completely casual about it, then that's maybe okay. What often happens though, and I think that you'd understand what I'm meaning here, is one person's more invested than the other. And what we know about relationships is that's the least rewarding type of relationship, when there's differences in investment at the level of commitment. We know that casual sex outside a relationship tends to be negatively linked to well-being, positively related to distress. Now again, there's a million different ways that can happen, in ways that more positive or more negative, right? So please give me a little bit of grace in the sense that I'm making generalized comments, right? And I think I'm at least trying to speak to the sense that there's exceptions and all that kind of stuff, right? Alcohol use is especially related, make people more prone to any kind of risk-taking behavior, sexually involved also. And this is the thing, is this isn't an anti-sexuality comment. It's almost like the opposite. It's like, no, like the secret is in the simple. It's like, again, this is now I'm kind of swaying into my own opinion. But I don't know. Am I a terrible person for wanting you to have a happy relationship with someone you actually care about and who cares about you? And, you know, just to go a little bit longer on that point, I do feel a little bit like old man Simpson, like preaching about kids these days dating all around. It's like, I don't mean to be like that at all. I'm just trying to make the point that, like, my wish for you is deep, rewarding relationships in whatever way works for you. And it's like, maybe I'll just leave it at that. So, cognitive development in early adulthood. Some theorize that many individuals consolidate, bring together this formal operational stage in adolescence, that the result is the emergence of more systematic, more sophisticated levels of cognition. And keep in mind, like, Piaget never thought that everyone reaches every level, right? Like, not everybody reaches this state of what he calls postformal thought. right? This being able to be even more reflect. He said that, like, you know, there's the 4 stages we heard about earlier in the course that were, now I'm on the spot, sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operation, or pre-operational, operational, and concrete operational, right? And that, oh, now I'm second guessing myself on, anyways, you get the idea, right? He has like the classic Google, Piaget, 4 levels of cognitive development. His idea is there's almost this additional one, this, I'm going to be beating myself up in my brain that I've fogged on the 3rd one. But that there's this like additional 5th level, this post-formal thought, formal operational. Man, I could have just read the slide, right? That's the last one. Pre-operational, concrete operational, formal operational. Right, post-formal operational or post-formal thought, that actually now you're at a state where like your ability to manipulate concepts in your mind, your ability to think outside the box. I'm going to let go that I have the words on that model wrong. Your ability to like have flexibility in thinking, like I was struggling with there, or just like your ability to, you know, be able to think about how things relate in different contexts and how this relates to this thing, and how you have to take into consideration contextual issues and what was the period of time in which things happened. Basically all this like just higher level cognition. This ability to have this reflective cycle, like to have a plan and to learn and to apply and then reflect on that plan and have that adapter plan. And like ideally this is like a wheel that's like, I don't know why I made it sound, but like going in a circle and you're updating in like the best way, right? In like a move towards self-actualization. Right? I remember what Viktor Frankl says, you can't aim at self-actualization, you have to aim at self-transcendence. You have to aim at being more than just focused on yourself. You have to focus on that your ability to influence the world towards less hell, towards more peace. It's like, or whatever, more humanity, and then that in itself is you self-actualizing. He says, like, he has a classic quote that like you can't approach self-actualization, you can only approach self-transcendence, and through self-transcendence you will achieve self-actualization, something like that. Like, I hope you NIPSing students like this class. Like, one of the things, again, it's like, I hope it's not 100% transactional. Like, obviously, like, I'm like teaching this from Kitchener, and you're like, you know, I think it's awesome that you're like following along from whether you're in North Bay or other parts of Ontario. And to be honest, it's like now that I've marked a ton of your assignments, and I looked at the class list the other day, I mentioned that, and I recognized that most of you are from last term, and some of the new students I've like been emailed back and forth with a few times, helping them get into the course or whatever. And so like I feel like I know this group pretty decently, right? Especially for like never physically meeting you. And I don't know, I just wanted to say I appreciate it. I appreciate that like my stuff's not 100% perfect. Some of it is like it's not going to be because I don't have like a tech team and I'm not great with tech. I'm trying to do decent. I finally got like a shield thing on my mic, so I think it like works a bit, sounds a bit nicer, and like, you know, we'll do our best. But what I appreciate is what I'm saying. Consideration of the declining creativity with age needs to take into account what we're talking about, right? It's not necessarily that people get less creative as they get older. It's they tend to focus their creativity towards a few things, right? As a kid, like my 6-year-old is like creative in a million different ways. I might be kind of creative with how I don't know. I'm not super creative. Maybe with how I like reading, like kind of out there ideas, or like I might be creative in thinking in certain ways, but not really artistically, right? People experience their creativity in different ways, and I'm going to talk about this flow idea, right? That when people are engaged in something that's like really meaningful and they're in that creative space, there's something deeply psychologically rewarding and fulfilling about that. So, next thing I want to talk about, creativity. What are some of the benefits of creativity? doing things like coloring and you playing in the toy room. It's good to help you be. I got my daughter here. She wants to say hi to you. Say hi, Nipissing.
Hi.
Try to say Nipissing. That's what the name of the school is.
Hi, Nipissing.
Good. Right? Thanks, sweetheart. Increases positive emotions, can decrease depressive symptoms, can help improve negative emotion in general, boost the immune system, right? Increase self-esteem, feelings of accomplishment, help improve things like concentration and focus, increase happiness. It's like kind of good all around, sweetheart. If you want to use your phone, if the tablet, can you use your phone in the other room, please? So now you got the ultimate balance going. Evie's in the toy room, but she's really good, and she's just playing teacher, so she's not that loud, and Charlotte's still sleeping. So yeah, Evie loves playing teacher, so it's easy to keep doing this when she's here. Okay, I only have a couple more slides, so I'm gonna finish up. Okay, just a couple more points here. Stress is another thing that starts to become obviously more of an issue in adulthood with the amount of pressures from every angle, right? And that today employees want more flexibility and greater control over your time, and it's like that's totally true. It's like that's like one of the only saving things during these last few years is like, especially being like a prof, like having some ability with my college job to have, you know, time in my schedule to support the kids sometimes, even though it's been like a massive balancing act. There's some people that have like much less flexibility for sure. Unemployment can produce stress, obviously, right? Regardless of if it's like temporary or cyclical or permanent. Right, and that kind of stress, especially on people in that kind of age range, especially with the potential of like lung and heart related, cardiovascular related ailments. It's like it can be those things are linked, right? Increased mortality risk for people in that stage, especially when they're high stress. Now, this is kind of interesting, and this links back to an idea we've discussed a lot in this course, how things that happen early in life are related to later, and that low self-control in childhood is actually linked to difficulty maintaining employment in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, right? And that's pretty interesting. That's kind of some proof that, you know, self-regulation ability early on is important in establishing the behavioral and mental patterns of future discipline. Okay, so just a quick review, 3 last slides. I'm just gonna kind of, you know, do this lightning round, my super cool name for it. Emerging adulthood, the time of transition from adolescence to adulthood, is characterized by expectation and exploration. The transition from high school to post-secondary school can be both positive and negative, right? We talked about one of the benchmarks for finding adulthood is this idea of finding purpose, and this is kind of related to our network. Peak performance is often reached between about 19 to 26. After that, we start to see detectable slowdowns in performance, at least in most individuals, unless there's like a lot of, some people have better genetics and some people just, and obviously like individual lifestyle. Health problems in emerging adulthood may include things like obesity, which is a serious issue in North America. Binge drinking is also a problem with post-secondary students. And a problem, right? I don't mean that morally. I mean that, well, if it's working for you or not. By the middle 20s, alcohol and drug use often decreases. Patterns of sexual activity change during emerging adulthood. An individual's preferences stem from a complex combination of cognitive, hormonal, genetic, and environmental factors. STIs are contracted primarily through direct sexual contact. Okay, thanks. Got my daughter just in the other room. Okay. This is actually situated. I hope the recording comes okay. This is actually kind of nice doing it here. I'll probably usually do it in the basement, but It's been proposed that the idealism of Piaget's formal operational stage, declines in young adults and is replaced by a more realistic, pragmatic thinking. Again, not everybody. Qualitatively different fifth cognitive stage that can be called post-formal thought. Right after that, if formal thought was like the highest stage originally, this is like after that. Social learning plays a key role in cognitive development, and work has this huge impact on people's lives, right? And identity, and working during college or university can have a positive impact, but it can also, make you more stressed out, which is sort of like super obvious, right? All right, I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Hope you learned something, and thanks for being awesome students. Take care.